Yes, so that book, or actually, it's a 4-hour video available on YouTube called "The Century of the Self." Starts basically with Freud and his nephew, um, Edward Bernays, who was featured throughout that entire sequence. Uh, but I was actually good friends of an industrial psychologist professor at Detroit Institute of Technology when I taught there, and I learned quite a lot from Bill. In fact, one of the things that I learned from him didn't help me like psychology very much at all, because it winds up being a way to manipulate others as opposed to a way for us to learn to control our own emotions and behaviors and actions and whatnot like that. But you can see that it got started that way just from Freud's model as him being the doctor. You've probably seen situations with a couch and he
Yeah.
writes talk, and they talk in what's called free association, etc., like that. And so the model of a big, powerful, important person, a professor or a doctor or a business or whatever like that, is in charge of the situation, and that the victim is at a lower position stationed physically, and that this person is normally considered to be a victim. That's why they're there. And so now they brought their victimhood into this big, powerful dude's office. They're normally going to establish the top dog, bottom dog, victim uh, position anyway. It's almost like it's built into the model.
Hmm.
And I didn't know if you knew that or not. And
Like,
so even modern day psychologists is still built on that model of the client pays the therapist, and then it's the therapist's job to fix the client, because the client couldn't fix themselves. If they could, they would have done so instead of coming and paying you to do it.
right.
It's also under the same rubric of a mechanic for your car, or an electrician, or a plumber, or whatever like that. That all the really yucky stuff, we want somebody else to do it for us. Well, what that did is that left psychology and the lords of psychology in power. And as you can see from that video, where it's gone, but that the original system was already there, except that in the original systems it was much more uh, um, a system that had fewer rules and fewer structures and fewer systems about it, but they were more rigid in place and harder to abandon, or harder to break, or the deeper the punishments would be. But that this is what Buddha was talking about in the idea of Sila Bhatta Paramasa, which, by the way, is the second fetter. And it's almost like these first two fetters work together, that it's hard to see uh, society's part in the mess up of my brain if I can't also see my own mess up of my brain, to recognize that this whole problem is my own damn fault. We have to kind of wake up to the Margaritaville song. Do you know that Margaritaville song?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the last line is repeated several times, as hell is my own damn fault.
Yeah.
But in the process is that some people will say there's a woman to blame. In other words, there's blame. And we play the blame game. That's the game of the victim, is to blame someone else for their problems. You see politicians do it all the time. You see entire religions doing it. In fact, I think that the game of victim was taught by the Muslims to the Christians, sort of a gift of how to be victim, how to, even if you're in charge, you still play the victim. And so this game of victim or top dog and underdog is what that whole society is built upon. And if we can understand, oh, wait a minute, each individual, certainly we're part of a network. We're really, really interconnected to other people, but that interconnection is much more dynamic and real and powerful in its own ways, rather than as the hierarchy or the system that humanity has established on top of what's really there. And that when we recognize the way that we fit into the cosmos, we begin to recognize, oh, wait a minute, if whatever is needed to be done is done, in other words, the building is built, why keep up the scaffolding? Let's take the scaffolding down. And what we do is we wind up seeing that the scaffolding is the entire system, the entire society. It's all scaffolding propping up a self. And when we are able to get rid of that constructed self and start pulling it apart, that's where we come to understand that means that I'm free from all of the rules and all the lies and all the stories I've been told. I'm free because I can see. I can see that deception coming. When a bait and switch is happening, when I see the bait, I know the switch. And because of that, we can avoid a lot of suffering because we can see what's going on. But sometimes this bait and switch stuff is happening only on the inside of our minds. And so that's what really needs to be done. And so, by the way, the third fetter is the fetter of doubt. Once we practice along the path well enough to recognize, oh, my whole life has been designed around fitting in the sense of self-preservation or finding my niche or whatever like that. Now my entire new frame of reference is suffering and no suffering. That it's not a self that needs to protect anymore. That in fact what the issue is to learn to avoid suffering. When we get that really firmly, solidly in our minds, then we really understand the Dhamma well enough to be free from the fetter of doubt. So now we have something, a really powerful tool that we would call curiosity. I want to know. I want to look. I want to see what's going on. I want to check that stuff out. And sometimes it even looks like that we play the part of a cat with a mouse. And here we are tossing it in the air, and we're seeing it go this way and that way, and we watch it run away, and we grab it, and we pull it, and we hold it again like that. Except in this case, the mouse is normally our own ways of dealing with things. And in fact, later when we start to talk about Paticca Samuppada and how sankharas or old memory systems fit in, you can recognize that mouse is just your own past. And so by playing cat and mouse with it, we often we don't get the results we're looking for. It's not so much satisfying. The cat, by the way, in that regard, leaves the mouse dead as a trophy, rather than the original point was that the mouse was killed because of food. So something's gone wrong in nature in that regard, to where now even the cat is playing it with an ego trip. So when we recognize then that the entire system of humanity has gotten based in a set of laws, rules, rituals, and whatnot like that, partly because of the idea that people set these rules in order to gain power, in order to feel secure, uh, feel powerful, etc., like that. So, the way that we can talk about it is the idea of the golden rule. You know, Jesus had a golden rule. His was not too far off. I like Jesus's golden rule, except for one small problem, and that is that often the better way to give someone is not to give them what you want, but to give them what they want. The example would be that the husband gives his wife panties and E-span for Christmas, and she gives him pots, pans, and a blender. But that's a ridiculous example of it. Normally, when we treat other people the way that we want to be treated, we wind up treating them pretty well because we want to be treated pretty well. But there is another kind of golden rule. In fact, there's two kinds of golden rules. One is the golden rule that you see quite commonly. Our entire society, in fact, with Buddhism, you could call it the Sila Bhatta Paramasa, is the golden rule of he who has the gold makes the rules. Now, that's the golden rule for you. By the way, that's not a good place because that light behind you casts a dark shadow.
How about that?
That's much better.
All right.
But there's another kind of rule, golden rule, and that's the original one. And the original one is he who makes the rules gets all of the gold. He who makes the rules gets to go. Why? Because if he's out there making rules, he's going to make rules not just arbitrarily, but he's going to make rules that's going to benefit himself. So most of the laws, rules, rituals, and all of that kind of stuff was based upon someone who's been long dead now, his greed. Even that would be the police. Why do we have police? Well, they started police in those places in wealthy communities to keep the riffraff out. So police, right from day one, have always been racial. That was their entire position, the point of existence. So this is what we wind up with is an entire system that while it benefits some more than others, it's at least working in the sense that without such a system, it's all going to be chaos.
Yeah.
It's all going to be wrong view. So we can look at this whole system through the lens of Sila Bhatta Paramasa, and we can see that, in fact, the view of the society could either be a wrong view or it can be a right view in the sense that the wrong view is where there's a lot of suffering, a lot of problems, a lot of theft, a lot of unhappy people, and maybe a few people that are happy, as opposed to a system that's working so that people are fairly well taken care of. They're not at the point of starvation, etc., like that. So these would be the two systems. You could call one is right view and one is wrong view. Or yes, backwards though. And that the right view, while it makes things a lot better, still has a lot of suffering. That basically the best that the laws, rights, rules, and rituals that a society can do is to draw boundaries between two people, so that each person has to deal with their own suffering, plus the other sufferers, while the rule keepers are not looking. But there's another way, and that is the noble view, which is also referenced in the sense of right noble view. And right noble view is to transcend that ordinary worldly view that winds up in suffering. Even though it was designed to take people out of suffering, it doesn't do a very good job. It just merely prevents too much chaos.
Right.
But it's not a useful system. And the reason for it is because it's always self-oriented. Each individual one was selfish. The rules were set up to protect either a one person or a small group of people. And as we lift those kind of artificial boundaries off, we begin to see people more as in a network rather than as a hierarchy. That we're bound together by more fundamental things. That as we gain right view, we recognize that we're not bound by rites, rules, and rituals. We're bound, as it were, by suffering and no suffering. That's where the real bondage is within the ways that each individual suffers, no matter what society they're in. That there has been never a society that was good enough. Utopia never happened. Shangri-La has never been found. And so the rites, rules, and rituals need to be transcended, not fixed. There's no fixing them.
Right.
And that anybody who tries to fix them winds up being part of the mess. At best they could do is pass new laws, make new rules, etc. like that, but they can't undo the old mess. All they can do is try to make tinker little small adjustments to it. While all the time, I am the big politician fixing society mind states are there. So the Buddha says, better just to walk away from the whole darn show, and let's find the actual real root of the problem, one that is small enough that it can actually be fixed. And so that's why Sila Bhattacharya is actually referred to as a fetter, is because we actually get attached to following the rules, to getting along, and all of that kind of stuff. It comes actually out of the nesting instinct, of the four main instincts. The nesting instinct is where animals, especially the higher animals, grazers tend to herd together at night. They tend to nest together for protection. They've learned a lot about land management by watching animals in nature. But if they're herded by a human, then things go really south. Everything gets eaten. But monkeys will build nests in the tree. Wolves dig holes, a pit. They'll have a den that they go to. Gophers, all kinds of animals will make a nest or a home for themselves. And that one of the qualities of nest, especially if you have a number of animals in that nest, is they have to be able to cooperate with each other. It's that very basic cooperation that's built deep into our DNA that when it's misguided, turns us into rule followers. To go along to get along. But now we've got a new way of looking, and that is the looking in it from the sense of the Dhamma, the sense of what is wise to do in the relationship of suffering and no suffering. What's the pathway right now to the least amount of suffering? And there, we don't need the rules. We begin to transcend them because we've got a new set of rule systems. So I gave you that thing to watch, that Century of the Self. because that shows you just the fact that the people are doing videos about it. Never mind that they're doing videos. Look at all the evidence that they've got piled up to show what a mess our society really is. But what it doesn't show so much is how each individual one of us who watched that movie can see how much of that trip that society has laid out that I bought into. Right from the very beginning of my life, I was programmed with that stuff. My parents gave it to me, as well as a major a dose of their own bad feelings, which I learned promptly. And so as children, we begin to store up ways of living, ways of feeling, pathways of feeling. And all of that stuff, by the way, is stored in the cerebellum. And you can see how rites, rules, rituals, and the ways that we feel are often intertwined because they were intertwined when they were fed together when we were so young. And so that stuff gets intertwined together, almost to the point of having religious and political views that are based upon feelings. That when I hear one word, I feel one way, and instead of examining what that one word means, which is perhaps a political party, and I check out to see what they have, and I look at it, and I say, maybe so. But most people are going to feel really bad when they hear that word, and therefore they're never going to look at it because they've already associated the whole idea with the feeling. I feel bad when I hear that word, therefore everything about that word must be bad because I feel bad. To where there's two things going on. One is that's actually wrong, but number two, the bad feeling associated with that word was learned behavior and was wrong in the first place. And then that gets stored in the mind, and so when we have perceptions like hearing that word, it brings up a certain feeling because we're in a habit of having that kind of feeling when we hear anything associated with that word. And I can name a whole bunch of words that have that kind of loading to it for various people. Yeah. God, Jesus, Bible, prayer. I mean, there's just so many triggers. Buddha.
Right.
Okay. So all of these words have triggers to them, and that they trigger feelings. Well, guess what? That's probably just the surface for people to recognize immediately. Oh, sure, I understand that immediately. But then if you start to look a little deeper, you'll realize that a lot of words, tens of thousands of words, are loaded with meaning and feeling. So that whenever we go into the past, we're going to wind up with bad feelings. That's very amazing. I've checked that out over and over again. Whenever my mind goes into the past, I wind up remembering something I don't want to remember. But that's a very good clue because then I can say, out! Get out!
Right.
Get out of here! You're unwanted. Get out of the past. Stay here. Stay present now. Because if there is not enough grief built into the past, we'll find the grief associated with the memory from someplace else, and we'll wind up adding grief to it anyway. Whenever we wallow in the past, it's not going to be down memory lane. There's not going to be sweet music, not for long. It's going to wind up being something that we don't like. An example of that, by the way, would be a meeting, and you got 8, 10 people in this meeting, regular business kind of meeting with a big table and all of that kind of stuff, and each one of them have their point, and each one of them has their time, and each one of them says this and that and the other thing, and they all come to an agreement, and they leave the room. And as they're filing out the door, you now have 10 different meetings. Because everybody had their own unique experience of that meeting, and if two of them get into a conversation about it, they'll wind up being catty, Finding something wrong with the meeting, or something happened, or you think about it and you can find, I should have said that. And that guy may not like me, or all kinds of crap that had nothing to do with the meeting itself. So it better, once the meeting is finished, is to get over it in the sense of, you can tell yourself, the meeting is finished now. It's over. Out of the mind. Throw it out of the mind. If there is a to-do list that came to you during that meeting, you should have written that down on that to-do list, but now the to-do list is a here now item. The meeting that gave you that to-do list is irrelevant. Can be forgotten. Bet you can. So this is the nature of memory, is that old things get stored. They get stored emotionally. There's also things that get stored intellectually. And then there's a third kind, which means that there is stored muscle memory. That the body itself, athletes, musicians, dancers, all kinds of people will tell you all about muscle memory. Karate people. One of the ways to pick up some muscle memory is doing Tai Chi, and then all of a sudden, here those hands go. So there's a really deep kind of memory that's built in, and the one that's the most powerful one is emotional memory. And so the best thing to do is to try to process new information without old data, but leaving it new, leaving it raw, leaving the old stuff behind. And another way, more importantly, is don't think about the past. Don't rummage around in there. Let that cesspool actually become, what do they call it? Compost. That's what it wants to be, is becoming compost. So leave the past out of it. Because, in fact, that's where all of those rites, rules, rituals, and everything and all of that is stored. But you also have the, let us call it the presence of mind, or that you're free from doubt about, can you handle this moment? Because that's really what it's all about. Can you be here now so that you can be alert and awake and Johnny on the spot to handle the situation that needs to be handled in the moment? If we feel insecure that we are capable of doing that, that's when we'll rely upon old rules, memories, things like that. But if we trust that we can do this present moment, then we can manage this present moment very well. But we need the skill developed to do that. And so that's, again, the Sila Bhatta Paramasa's role in the mind, is that it's the foundation upon, or the floor that we walk on. And what we need to do is learn to walk on the grass instead, where the grass is dangerous. The floor we can look at and we can clean it. So that's another way, but you can also think of it as the metaphorical floor, in the sense of, in a political party, they call about this idea and this rule and this thing we want to do, etc., as a plank in our platform. So that's the way that we're looking at it now, is all of our rites, rules, and rituals are like a board or a plank, except that very few people get an actual platform built. For most people, it's just a pile of lumber. And probably not even well wrapped together the way it was delivered on a truck, but rather the way that it was dumped off the truck and it just fell into a big pile. And that's the normal human mind. And it's all a jumble in there. And so the best thing to do is to kind of leave it alone now, or take from it only that which is needed to be taken from it. So that's the way of finding our own new way of doing things based upon suffering and no suffering. So we've covered these first three fetters, but there's something that also comes into play quite a lot with that. And in fact, what we're talking about is how does one actually come to the state of understanding these three fetters as they are, with such a firm commitment as is going to be needed to root that stuff out. Because that's where the Eightfold Noble Path comes from, or actually the Four Noble Truths, which I'm now calling the third knowledge. The third knowledge is when the student comes to understand that the concept of living a life of suffering and no suffering, and all of the parts that come to fit together within the Four Noble Truths. And we don't see it in the beginning. It kind of looks like a puzzle or a map to be studied or something like that, which is true. But the real usefulness of it is when we start to see the Four Noble Truths, like the Second Noble Truth and the stuff that's under there in this present moment. So the Buddha talks about it in the phraseology as this is suffering, which means the direct observation of suffering. This is the cause of suffering, in the sense of the direct observation of what the suffering is and how it's being caused. And then this is freedom from suffering, which is something that every student needs to be involved in right from the very beginning, and yet almost no teachers talk about it. But the Buddha does, because Buddhadasa does. We talk about it in the sense of gladdening the mind. We talk about pleasure. We talk about, hey, get out of the heat. The kitchen is hot. If the kitchen is hot, get out of the heat. Get out of the kitchen. When you get out of the kitchen, you can cool off. So we need to learn to cool off. We need to know what it is to feel good about ourselves on at least once or occasionally, because we want to go back and continue to visit that place more and more and more often. So that then we can finally say, this, in this present moment, this is what it's like to be free from suffering. This is Nibbana. This is cool, guys. This is really nice. It's delicious. I love it. And then he talks about this is the path. And the path then that the students have already been on is actually the path of meditation, but the path of meditation is actually the Eightfold Path that they're working with. In the sense that the very first time that a student sits down to meditation and his mind wanders away and he recognizes the mind wandered away, that's sati, which is part of the Eightfold Noble Path. Sati, to remember. And then we have right effort, to throw the stuff out of the mind and to come back to the breath. Well, effort is part of the path. It always was there. The rationale behind doing this, why should I care? Why don't I just let my mind wander away? And I've had students tell me that. They didn't stay with me very long. Actually, not they, just one. I've only had one student like that who could not understand that this is actually going to be work. You have to take some effort. That this is beyond free association. So you have to put the right effort in, but you have to know that you have to put the right effort in, and that new thing is the right view. You have to have the right view that, oh, I am actually sitting in meditation, and this is what we're doing. We're remembering to clean the crap out of the mind over and over and over again, and that cleaning process is actually twofold. One of them has to do with attitude, and the other one has to do with effort. But as we get good at it, the effort that was originally sometimes a lot of effort and a little joy now wind up with very little effort and a lot of energy and a lot of joy. And those four things are the things that are related. The right attitude. The attitude, hey, I can do this. The attitude of the lion The Buddha was a lion. He was not a victim. Victims are the ones who say, well, I'm just going to let my mind wander away because it's too much work to try to bring it back again. Never mind that he just slipped his mind into a cesspool again. Been there, done that. And so that's quite amazing then to find out that, in order to be rid of these fetters, we have to have a really deep understanding of the way that the mind works itself. And when we understand how the mind works, we can give up all notions of what a self is. We can give up all notions then about our relationship and responsibilities to the outside world, because my major responsibility is, first off, with my own mind, and second off, with the people immediately around me, to make sure that I'm not creating suffering for them. Other than that, I don't need the rest of the world. That's a big place out there with a lot of problems and too many people trying to fix those problems. Imagine that you had a wagon that was stuck in a ditch, and you ask your friends to come help you. And so everybody puts a hand on it, and then they still can't get it, and so they wind up with a whole lot of people, and everybody is pushing to get that wagon out of the ditch. And everybody is putting a hand on the wagon wherever they can get a hand in. So you wind up people completely surrounding this wagon. Everybody's pushing in their own direction, and all they do is they wind up collapsing and breaking the wagon. That wagon has a sign painted on it. It's called United States of America. And every one of them in there is a politician, and everyone's got the right idea about which way to push this wagon. The fact is, if they all would get together and push the wagon in one direction, they could get it out of the ditch, and it doesn't matter which direction they would all push in. It has to do with agreement and cooperation. You're not going to find that in Washington. Actually, sometimes it's even hard to find that in one's own mind. And in fact, looking at the Eightfold Noble Path, that's what Sama, Arya Sama Samati, right noble mind, or right noble. The word Samati here is generally translated as the word concentration, but in this case, the word Samati doesn't mean concentration the way that you would think of as jhana. What it means instead is unity or wholeness. So a better word, and Bhikkhu Bodhi actually uses this word, is unification of mind. So when you practice the Eightfold Noble Path, one of the ways that we have become unified in mind is by free from doubt. If we've got doubts about things, we're scattered. We're all over the place. Another one is that if we have, if we tell lies, if we're trying to protect the self, telling lies is scattered. We're scattered between the lie itself, which is a protection mechanism, and the truth, which is who I really am. And so when we lie, we're no longer unified. This unification of mind is also called noble, though I don't think that modern language uses the word noble quite the way that it meant in centuries past. But we can think of it in other words like honorable or having integrity. That someone is doing what they're doing with a kind of directness, so that they're not all over the place, they're not scatterbrained. That this is a quality of unification of mind. Now, the way that the Buddha talks about it, he says, listen and closely, monks, and attend carefully. I will teach you right unification of mind with its supports and requisites. And then he starts off with right view, which is exactly what we were starting with, in the sense of total chaos versus a system of working, which is a kind of a right way as opposed to a wrong way, but it's still got a lot of problems and dangers with it. And then there's the third way, which is the noble way, which is to come out of suffering by coming out of it directly. As suffering is seen, you come out of it. And you don't need a set of rules, rites, rituals, ceremonies, or anything else to do that. That in fact, the ceremony should be a joy or a toy as opposed to a commitment. An example of that would be marriage. Originally, marriage was not just a celebration, but it was also a business deal that became, she's my property now. I just paid you all of these motorcycles and televisions and gave you that land. It's time for me to own this girl. Wait a minute. It wasn't a motorcycle, it was a camel, sorry.
How far back we going?
You're right. I don't know, but I do know that it still happens with both camels and televisions.
All right.
But the point is, then, is that in modern times, it's become a ceremony, death do you part, and no one believes that line anymore. Yeah. Why don't the priests hold up their hands in air quotes, and when they do, until death do you part, or until you change your will, or maybe a divorce document, or who gets the kids, or whatever, and be real about it. Because marriage ceremonies don't work. Funerals don't work either. They're supposed to alleviate grief. But when the widow gets the bill from the mortician, she's going to really grieve. So a lot of these ceremonies, another example of take Jesus as your Savior, be baptized. You know baptism. That's when you go into muddy water and take a bath with all your clothes on. And then you vote for Donald Trump. and that's baptism. And then you say to Jesus, 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 please save me, please save me. And then the preacher goes, ooby dooby gobby gobby, rah rah sis boom ba kyrie eleison in excelsis Deo. And then you're free from sin. That was on Sunday night. What happened on Monday morning? Here comes the sin again. That ceremony didn't work. We're automatically back feeling bad again. So that's about the shortest lived ceremony I know. I learned in high school that there were a certain group of old ladies. Some of them did it on a regular basis. Others of them did it about once a year, depending upon revivals or whatever like that. But it was sure interesting to note 2 years in a row when it was the same poor old ladies that came down the aisle on the first day of the what do they call it? When the traveling preacher comes in and takes over the church because he doesn't want to bring a tent anymore. Revival, right. So I learned all about it, right. They do that. It's the same crowd that keeps coming down the altar. And it's not because this is planned or anything, or that the preacher's paying people to do it because nobody else will do it. They come down naturally because they feel that their first and second and third baptism didn't take effect because they haven't been freed from sin yet. So much for this Sila Bhatta Paramasa. We've got to have a better way. Oh, we do. It's called the Eightfold Noble Way. We have to learn to be noble. Have to come out of these delusions. And when we recognize that, then the mind begins to really focus, really concentrate as we go through this process. And that the first real noble knowledge that a student gains is the knowledge that no matter how obstructed the mind is, no matter how much in the past it is stuck, I can clean it out. Okay, that's the first knowledge, which is in fact, in a way, overcoming the doubt of, can I clean my mind out? The answer is yes, you can. You can clean that stuff out. You just have to keep doing it over and over again, because it keeps marching right back in for a while. And you throw it out again. Here it comes again. Throw it out again. And when we get used to doing that, that throwing it out actually is the recognition. So a lot of stuff happens at that point. Sati, I remember to throw that out. Actually, basically, in the beginning, it's to remember to come back to the breath. But now we recognize, oh, we can use this same sati as a developmental skill for many other things too. It's really handy to get started with the breath, but after that, there's a whole lot more to anapanasati. There's the whole damn mind to clean out. And the way that we do it is by remembering to do it. And how we get started on it is when the mind wanders away from the breath, never mind, forget about Aunt Susie or last week's work or what we had for dinner or any of that kind of stuff, and come back to this present moment. Take a deep breath, be happy right here, right now, and while you're doing that, you've got right noble view. You have right noble sati. You have right noble effort, and you've got right noble attitude, all wrapped up into that quality that we're developing as unification of mind. And so this all stuff fits together. The Buddha's got it dissected. It's like, for some reason, Buddhism gets delivered as if it were a kit instead of a product. And if you think of it as the kit's like a car. And now you're delivered 10,000 pieces of car and a piece of paper. The directions for how to put your car together. And so it seems daunting. But as you begin to recognize, oh no, the more we conceptualize about what is what in here and how this thing fits in relationship to the car, you begin to put things together. Another way of looking at it is like a jigsaw puzzle. And every time we talk, I give you 4, 5, 6 pieces. And your job is to set those things together and see if you can fit them into what's already been said. And pretty soon, you put the whole puzzle together. You can see it as a unit, that it's not just 500 individual pieces. But in the beginning, for most students, Buddhism really does look like that. Oh, there's 6 of these and 4 of those and 4 more of those things over there and 3 of this and 2 of those and 16 of these things and 12 of those.
Yeah, well, everyone explains it in their own different way, and I feel like the way you put it has made the most sense to me. And I've been reading some of Buddha Dasa's stuff, and it's all very like, oh, this is how it fits together and why. It's not like these kind of abstract references to the Eightfold Noble Path when it's convenient for some. It's more like, this is it. It's very simple. And it's all clicked for me, like from taking pieces here and here and here, and then like you just kind of put it all together. And I was like, oh, it's really actually pretty simple.
Exactly. And by simple, there's a lot of connotations that come with that word. One is doable.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. That's that first quality that we're looking for. The I can do this.
Yeah.
No matter how obstructed the mind is in this moment, by recognizing that the mind is obstructed, I can throw that stuff out and come to be here now. And we learn to do that over and over again until we come to the point that beyond a shadow of a doubt, we can do that. And I've heard students give various expressions to do that. They call me in sometimes and they say, the other day this happened. And then they explain the whole day. And basically what they're doing is they're telling me every time that thought came up, they were able to squash it. And then it came up later, and they squashed it. And it came up later, and they really started to feel good about being able to squash that thought. And the phrase that Danny was using at that time was, this is really a bad day. It's like, this day sucks. This is a bad day. and he could find 10,000 reasons to make it bad. But every day is bad if you think about it like that. Then he could catch himself. And he said, "Oh, look at that." And he was able to throw that thought out over and over and over again. And it really is a major change in our perception, because he was actually being able to change his mind from that victim's position that it is a bad day, which means I am the victim of this day, into the winner of, "Oh, I see I'm saying that again. Look at that. Out you go." And that's a winner's position. That's the change in attitude that's so profound, that is actually that second item in the more traditional view of the Eightfold Noble Path, and that is right attitude, which they call right intention. But intention and attitude are close enough together. But when they say right thought, I'm beginning to say, wait a minute, that's not a very good translation.
Right. No.
But I use the translation of attitude.
Yeah.
And the right attitude is going to be a winner's attitude, a joyful attitude, a satisfied attitude, a happy attitude. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa has a work called Hunger and Happiness. It's easily found on the internet. And he talks about this. In fact, he's also in that way talking about the third noble truth. Is to be happy and satisfied, to figure out what it's like to be completely okay with the way things are.
Yeah, I'm reading Heartwood of the Bodhi Tree and Me and Mine. I got those two of his.
Heartword's is a slog. It is a slog.
Yeah, no, it's pretty good. I'm a slow reader though. I like, I'll read a few pages and then fall asleep.
Like I said, it's that kind of book. It's a slog. Partly because it's so dense.
Yeah.